Welcome back. The state's largest school district is currently facing a $771 million pension shortfall. But why?
A multi-series investigation by the Omaha-World Herald revealed that trustees and administrators overseeing the Omaha Public Schools pension fund transformed one of the nation's best performing funds into one of the worst. I sat down with the World Herald reporter who wrote the series. He explains how this nearly $1 billion mistake is now costing the district major cuts. So how did you even get started with this investigation?
Well, it started with when we saw that the school district had formed essentially a special committee to cut their budget so that they could make these extra payments into their pension fund. I mean, they essentially this past year had to cut their budget 3% just to make these extra pension payments, and it's going to be a millstone around the district for years, maybe even decades to come. I mean, for the foreseeable future. The payment, which was $19 million this past year, is just supposed to go up and up and up. My thought was to find out, why did this happen? Because the reason that was given was, it was blamed on the stock market. And that just didn't make sense because, we all have our 401ks. We know that when the Great Recession hit in 2008, yeah, our stock holdings they all plummeted in value. But then they went back up. I mean, the stock market went up 250%. So the explanation that was out there just didn't make any sense. So I decided to look into it to see what exactly did happen with this pension fund.
And what have you been able to find through your investigation?
Well, what I found was there were a lot of mistakes that were made. They were investment mistakes. They were mistakes in the way they did things. The short answer is on investments is they kind of sold out on stocks to some degree, a pretty big degree, right as the market was at or near its bottom. And what they did was you're locking in your losses when you do that. Everyone knows you buy low, sell high. Well, they did the opposite of that.
Who are they? Who is ultimately responsible?
The pension fund was governed by a board of trustees. It was made up largely of district personnel. I mean, you had everything from the superintendent to a district plumber that were part of this board of trustees. There were a couple of outside folks as well. There were school board members on it. And they are the ones that are essentially making these decisions. They were the ones that made this decision to sell low on stocks. And then after that, then they compounded the mistake by getting into a lot of non-stock type investments. They're called alternatives. They're not things that generally you and I invest in. They didn't choose those investments very well. A lot of them were really poor performers. A lot of them actually lost money. And when you look at the process by which they chose the investments, from the best I can tell, there was no process. These investments were brought before the trustees by the executive director of the pension fund, and they voted for them, and they weren't given any other choices. It's not even clear how the executive director was finding these investments. He says he had the help of a consultant to find them. He named some specific consultants. I see no evidence that those consultants were used to find these investments.
So how are the poor decisions from back then affecting the district now?
Well, it took a while for it to kind of catch up to them. I mean, essentially what happened is all pension funds saw a big dip when the stock market, went down in 2008, but then the others gradually recovered. Well, OSER's didn't. In fact, it kind of slowly was going the other way. So it took a while for these decisions that were made in 2008, 2009, 2010 to catch up to them. And then when they did catch up, it was in about 2015, and it caught up with a vengeance. And now the school district is having to make these, to shore up the fund, is having to make these extra payments. And like I said, it was $19 million this year. It's supposed to be $21 million this coming year. It's probably actually going to be higher than that. We'll find out this spring what the new payment is going to be. And for the foreseeable future, they're going to have to continue to make these payments. And that's what the district is now going to have to try to figure out. How are we going to get through this without, harming the education of kids? I mean, we're talking about the school district that arguably has a higher hurdle than any other school district in the state. They educate more poor kids and at-risk kids than any school district in the state. And now they're being saddled with this big extra expense that's going to be just ongoing for a long time.
What other options does the district have right now to try and fix this mess?
The state kind of has shown that this is your problem, OPS. That there was already an effort made to kind of combine. OPS is unique. It's the only school district in the state that has its own pension fund. All the others are in a combined state fund. They tried to merge those systems 3 years ago, and the legislature wouldn't have anything of it. And they weren't willing to take on this deficit, which is, you know, approaching $800 million in this fund. So there aren't a lot of alternatives. Cheryl Logan, the new superintendent, and OPS has formed a task force, and they're working through some of the things that can be done. Case law, Nebraska law, makes it pretty hard to cut a pension benefit. It's kind of seen as something that's guaranteed. It's part of a contract. But there may be some little things they can do on the margins to ease that. We don't really know what the answer is yet, and that's something they're going to be working on for months and years to come, really.